Okay, and the first of the new weapons we can acquire with the kut-ku scale tactic is the Iron Sword. The Iron Sword is a new class. It's a new class to us. It's the Great Sword. A Great Sword is pretty much just a single big sword. It's pretty slow to swing around. It's probably the second slowest after another class we're going to talk about in a bit. This class, it can defend. I'll go over more of the details when we actually use one. Won't do that for a while, but when I do use one eventually, I'll show it off. But basically, when you defend with a great sword, the defense will go, well, not the defense, the sharpness will decrease every time. I think that is in this game. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's the weakness of a great sword's defense, is that every time you use it, it will lower your sharpness. So just be careful and use your defending wisely, because obviously the more you use it, the lower your sharpness. But back to the Iron Sword, it's a great sword for first-time hunters, capable in combat with many kinds of monsters. So yeah, it's pretty much just the bog standard mineral version of the great sword. It's got an attack of 288, which you will notice is far higher than anything you can probably achieve with a sword and shield at this point in the game. So that's pretty nice. That's one of its draws. Massive attack. Great swords are really good for that. It's just a bit slow in the delivery of it. It's Blade Master, obviously. Great swords or Blade Master types. Rarity 1, obviously, because it's a first time weapon, you're not really going to expect anything amazing. Its sharpness, a little bit less than what you expect from other weapons you've seen so far. It's okay, it will last you until you upgrade the weapon. To make it, you would need iron ore, which again we don't have yet. We'll have in a coming episode, but we don't have it yet, so you can only buy it at the moment. Okay, now that we covered that one, let's move on to the next weapon, which is the Bone Blade, which you probably guessed by now is the bone equivalent of the Iron Sword. Every bit as strong as iron, this bone sword is capable of any kind of combat. Pretty much, it's just exactly the same. However, it has got slightly higher attack of 336, but its sharpness is quite a bit lower. As you can see, the yellow sharpness is pretty much not even there. So yeah, if you want a weapon that's going to last a long time, Iron Sword. If you want one that does a lot more damage, this one, which for now that's probably best, since you're not going to be facing anything where you're going to have to fight it for long periods of time where you can't sharpen your weapon in between. It's actually one of the weapons you can make right now, since we do have small monster bones on us. So it costs 1,350 zenny. It's quite a bit more than what you've seen so far for other weapons, but yeah, the bigger the weapon, pretty much the more it's going to cost, until you get later on where pretty much it all blends into one and all of the weapons will cost ridiculous amounts to improve them. Okay, and now that we've talked about great swords, let's move on to our next type of weapon, which is hammers. Hammers are common staples in RPGs. You'll see a lot of hammers everywhere in them these days. Hammers are pretty much the slow, powerful weapon. All of them have really high power, but they are incredibly slow. As it says, can be very powerful if used effectively, incredible when charged up, cannot guard. So yes, as it says, this weapon has no guard, so you can't defend like the sword and shield, or the great sword, or another weapon I'll get onto into a minute. But this one, it has a charge ability, so if you hold R1, instead of defending, it will charge up the weapon, which I'll show off, and then release a really powerful attack, which is probably one of the best ways to use this weapon, since it is incredibly slow. When you like run in and try and just hit something with it, it will take about 2 seconds to hit it just with one attack, so you really want to be careful when you charge with this thing. As you can see, massive attack power of 312, that is pretty good. Decent sharpness, as we've seen with most of the starting weapons. Again, requires iron ore, we don't have it, so you're just going to have to buy it from the store, using the kut-ku tactic to make money. So that's pretty nice, but the next weapon we're going to talk about is the Bone Hammer, which you've probably guessed by now is the bone equivalent of the Iron Hammer. So as you can see, there's a trend going here. There's always going to be an iron one and a bone one. So this one's made of bone but as strong as iron, fearsome when charged but cannot guard. As you can see, it shares all the same traits as the other hammers. This one cannot guard, but it does charge up, which is pretty nice. Again, with all the other bone weapons, this one has a higher attack but lower sharpness, which is, you know, to each their own. You might want one thing over the other. We can make this one because it requires small monster bones. It costs 1,890 to create, which is not bad, but still quite a bit compared to some other weapons. Gonna shake it up a bit here. This is not the last hammer we're going to be talking about. Next we're going to be talking about the Bone Club branch, which is pretty much its own branch in and of its own. It's not part of the Bone branch. It's something you'll find in a couple of the weapon sort of trees, that there's this random extra branch where you can make a really crappy weapon. that's pretty much not used for anything because it pretty much always has red sharpness, even though it's got quite high attack for now. It's got 416 attack at just its base level, which is pretty good to be honest at this beginning point of the game. It requires mystery bones, which is something we got as a reward in the previous quest. So that's pretty nice having those, and having a lot of them you can make this weapon. It's an undefilable club-like bone, useful only for training purposes, so as it says, this weapon is not exactly that good. It's something you'll only use if you pretty much have a lot of the materials and you have the money to burn. It's pretty much not something you would ever use on a proper quest because 1, you'll get owned, 2, you're endlessly getting annoyed at the fact that you can't hit a creature without bouncing off with your weapon all the time, and 3, you'll then be stuck on that quest with that rubbish weapon. I couldn't think of a third one, alright, but never mind. Something that's worth note is that you can actually upgrade this weapon right now to its final stage, which is the Great Bone Club. The Great Bone Club is the ultimate bone club, a great way to learn about weapon improvement. So yeah, this weapon pretty much only has 2 stages. It has the first stage of creation and then the upgraded version. As you can see, the improved and crate weapon boxes have changed. They're no longer exactly the same. To improve it from the Bone Club, you require small monster bones, but to create it from scratch, you require 10 mystery bones and 1 small monster bone, and a bit more money. To improve, it costs 1050 zenny. As you can see, it has a little bit more sharpness, so it's better, just not by a lot. If you want a really early on, kind of powerful weapon, since it has 624 attack, which to be honest is pretty good for this point in the game. And even though this weapon will bounce off a couple of creatures, such as the Amphinoth, I think it will even bounce off of them, which to be honest, if it bounces off of them, it's not the best weapon. So I would only suggest this if you really want a powerful weapon early on. This is useful for nothing else, and that is it. So if you have money to burn, have materials to burn, and you just want a powerful weapon, go for this. But what we're talking about next is a new type of weapon, which are lances. Lances are a new type of weapon we haven't seen before. Lances are more of a precise and powerful attacker. It doesn't have as much power as, say, a greatsword or as a hammer. However, it is a lot more precise since it's more of a jabbing motion than just a swinging motion. So you get pinpoint accuracy, well, not pinpoint accuracy, but you get a lot more accuracy than if you were swinging a greatsword. So this weapon sacrifices power for accuracy, which is pretty nice. Something else worthy of note is that it has a shield. It has a proper big shield, which is really useful since it gives you some really good defense. It doesn't decrease your sharpness, and it pretty much blocks everything. Unless it's some massive creature that just smashed into you or something like that. But we'll get more into that really late into the game. But for now, I just want to say that this shield is the best you're going to find on any weapon in the game. It is the best defense you can have. It blocks nearly everything. But going into more details on a specific weapon, we have the Iron Lance. The Iron Lance, a hard to handle lance, has a powerful thrust, superior guard ability. So yeah, it's again bog standard material weapon. It basically uses iron ore and stuff like that. There's not a whole lot to note here. It's pretty much the same as every other iron-based weapon that we've seen so far. It follows the trend. It's nothing amazing, but it's good to start with if you want to start with lances. And lances, by the way, are one of the best weapons in this game for single player, since it gives you a lot of accuracy, a lot of power, defense, and it just covers for a lot of the things that your partners online would have provided for you, which is pretty nice to be honest. The next weapon we're going to talk about is the Bone Lance, which again is the equivalent of the Iron Lance for bones. As you can see, it's pretty much bog standard, apart from, to create this weapon you require iron ore, which is the only one of the bone weapons you require iron ore or any other material to start off with. So this weapon breaks the trend a little bit, but it's pretty much exactly the same as everything else. It's nothing amazing, but it's still a good starting weapon. Every bit as strong as iron, high guard ability with a powerful thrust, so that's pretty nice. It's nothing amazing, nothing too fantastic. It's still a really good weapon though, so if you want to start with lances, check out the trees for them. You'll find them online and you'll be able to figure out if you want to make either the Iron Lance or the Bone Lance. Both of them lead to some really good stuff once they get really far in, so check it out. It could be really good if you want to play this game. Lance is one of the best ways to go for someone who's just got into the series. It's really the good bog standard weapon which you can just get in and just have some fun. So if you're looking for a starter weapon, one of these is fantastic. But what we're talking about next is a completely different class of weapon altogether, which is bowguns. Bowguns are one of the weapons where they differ from most of the other ones because they are a gunner class weapon. Instead of having to bring things like whetstones and stuff to a quest, you bring bullets, which I'll go over in a moment. As you can see, this one has a reload speed of slow, it has an attack of 156 to 216, which I'll explain more when we go over them a bit more, but basically, unlike the other weapons, you don't improve them from one type of weapon to the next one in different sort of levels. This one, it pretty much just goes from level 1 to level 5. There is no change of sort of appearance, it's just a change in power and that sort of thing. There's nothing too fantastically amazing about it. It just improves in power. And as you can see down the bottom, you have create weapon, which is basically the materials required to create a weapon from scratch. And then you have the improvement cost. So to go to level 2, it costs 560, and then again 840, and again and again and again. Below that, you have silencers, long barrel, and zoom scopes. You can add extra little things to each one of these weapons to make them slightly better or to suit a certain quest. For example, if you're hunting something where you want to stay at range, a long scope would be good, like a zoom scope. Silencer, so if you want to stay silent, even though in this game that's pretty much really ineffective since you're standing right there in front of it, you can't really hide. It's gonna know you're there instantly once you've shot it, so that's kind of pointless. Long barrel adds a bit of damage to it, which can be very nice if you just want to have that extra bit of damage just to get that extra bit out of your gun. It's very useful. Something else to know about gunner classes is that you're going to want to heavily rely on the items you bring with you. For example, traps and bombs. They do a lot of damage and it helps you out a lot because gunner classes mainly used online as a support class and a long range class which does a lot of the multi sort of area effect healing. So yeah, this class not exactly the most powerful but can be used offline since I've got pretty much to the end of the game just using this class, and then I was held back by the most powerful monsters. But then again, very effective class if you use correctly. And the first one we're going to talk about is the Arbalist. The Arbalist is a heavy bowgun. Heavy bowguns are normally a lot slower than their lighter counterparts, and you move a lot slower. You move as if you were holding, say, a greatsword or a hammer, which we haven't seen yet, but just be aware that they move quite a bit slower than their lighter weapon counterparts. So yeah, if you're going to use this, you're going to want to concentrate on what your creature that you're hunting is doing, because you won't have very quick reactions. You'll be very slow and sluggish to get out of the way, so be careful. This one is the most common heavy bowgun, popular for its overall utility. So yeah, this weapon, it generally can do a lot of things. It can use a lot of different types of bullets, as I'm about to show. So as you can see, it can use a lot of the basic weapons. It can use normal bullets, which are pretty much bog standard. They don't have any special effect, they just do damage. Piercing, which goes through thicker monsters' hides. So if monsters have, say, a really hard piece on their face where you can't shoot through that with normal bullets, these pierce through and hit it. They can also pierce through many monsters in a row. So if you have a smaller monster and you want to shoot through it and hit several monsters in a row, this can do it. Pellets, they're basically a spread shot. They just shoot out in several different directions, get a lot of little bits of damage in, which can be very nice when fighting little monsters. And also if you're really close up, you just shoot it and it just hits several different areas. So if there's a really hard bit, because I'll go over monster strengths later on, but as you go on, they will see that some parts of the monster will be harder than others. These can hit several different parts, and they won't just hit the one spot you're aiming at, which is quite nice. Crags are basically just explosive weapons. They will just shoot into a single spot and explode on that spot. They can do a lot of damage. You can't carry that many, but they're very useful to have, especially against larger monsters where you just want to hit it and do a lot of damage. Cluster, very similar, however, as you can probably guess, they spread out a little bit. They do less damage, but they spread out, do a little bit more area effect damage, which is quite nice and more useful when hunting smaller things since they can hit smaller monsters. Say if a monster jumped in and tried to get in the way of a bigger monster, it will still hit the smaller monster and knock it away, which can be very nice, especially when you don't want to bother with them. Disc shots, there are no levels for that one because basically it's just a disc stone in a bullet form, which basically means you're shooting a disc stone, which, to be honest, they're not exactly the most effective weapon in the world, but you know, if you have nothing else and you just want to carry an extra type of bullets, it's very nice to have. Recover shots, that's actually the most helpful offline since they're used to recover health of your allies, since you can't exactly shoot yourself. So carrying those are pretty much pointless offline. Poison, which this weapon can't use, that's what the grey numbers mean. It means this weapon can't use this level or this type of shot. Poison, as you can probably guess, poisons your monster. Well, not your monster, but your opponent, which is a monster. You know what I'm trying to say here. So that can be very helpful if you're slowly whittling it down, use a bit of strategy. Very, very nice to have. As you can see, we've got a few more here. We've got stun, which is paralysis, which is basically a stunning shot, which, you know, obviously it causes paralysis. You know what paralysis is. It just prevents the monster from moving, allows you to set up traps, maybe set up for a bigger shot, which is very nice. Sleep is basically, it puts the monsters to sleep. Very useful in some circumstances, where if you put it to sleep, drop bombs on it, and then blow them up, it can do a hell of a lot of damage. Trank shots are used for something we'll get into later. It's the third type of quest that we can get into, which we'll get into around about 4 star, so trust me, you won't be using those shots anytime soon. Paint shots are the same as paintballs, which I don't think we've gone over yet, but when we do, you'll understand what they do. It's pretty much so you don't have to carry an extra paintball along with all the other bullets. You can just have it in your gun and you just shoot it without having to change out from your weapon, which is very nice. Antidotal shot, again another online bullet that you can't use because it's used for curing poison on your allies, which you can't really use on yourself. Demon shots are pretty much another online thing where it gives a buff to your allies. It will give them strength, basically it makes them stronger for a set amount of time, which to be honest could be very useful online, but offline it serves no purpose whatsoever, so to be honest you're not going to be using this shot. The same goes for armor shots. They pretty much provide armor to your target, so again online that will be very useful. Offline has no purpose whatsoever, so don't carry them. They're kind of pretty much a useless, it'd be pretty much a wasted space in your inventory, which by the way later on very, very useful to have as many spots in your inventory open as possible. Okay, and the next up is dragon shots. Dragon shots do a lot of dragon elemental damage to a monster, which could be very helpful if it was used by more than 2 guns in the entire game, and those guns were available offline. Another problem with them is that you can't really carry a whole lot of them. You can only carry a few of them at a time, and to be honest they're not exactly that helpful when given those limitations. So to be honest, these shots, you're never going to be able to use them, and to be honest they're not exactly worth carrying even if you could. The last one is dung shots. Dung shots could be very useful if used in the correct way. Dung shots force a monster to leave an area after a set amount of time, the same way a dung bomb works. They could be very, very useful items if used correctly. However, they do take up a space in your inventory, and to be honest, it may not be worth it. So to each their own. Those are the bullets. So this gun, it carries a lot of the basic types of bullets, so that could be very useful for a novice hunter and a good way to get into it. Okay, next up is light bowguns. Light bowguns, they work slightly different from bowguns. They're still a gunner class, they still work on bullets, however they're normally faster and you can move a lot quicker. It's similar to carrying a sword and shield, you can roll and that sort of thing. It's very quick, and for faster monsters, very useful. Early on in the game, very useful if used correctly. As you can see, this is the crossbow gun, the basic bow gun you can get at this point in the game. You can only buy it, as with the Arbalest, you can only buy them at the moment. You don't have the materials to make them. It's a low price light bow gun produced in large numbers, perfect for novices. As you can see, it has a lot less damage than a heavy bow gun, which is one of the drawbacks of light bow guns. They do a lot less damage. It only has 96 to 156 damage, which is a lot less than the Arbalest. Then again, these weapons do have their drawbacks, but they are a lot better early on in the game when you have to roll around, run about, get up and down a lot of places very quickly. Very useful. As you can see, normal reload speed, which is pretty much bog standard reload speed. It's not fast, it's not slow, it's just standard, which is quite nice. Something else you'll notice, the improvement costs for light bow guns are a lot less than those for heavy bow guns, since they normally cost a lot more to improve. So light bow guns against heavy bow guns, they're really just to suit certain situations, and to be honest, they work a lot better online. As I explained with the bullets, a lot of them are very useful online. Offline serve no purpose. So to be honest, to each their own really. I prefer to use swords than guns. I will be showing off guns eventually, but I won't be using them a whole lot, to be honest, because I just feel they're not exactly the best weapons to do a lot of the quests with. And as we move on to bullets, you can see that light bow guns compared to heavy bow guns can use a lot fewer types of bullets. This one can only use normal 1 and 2 shot, piercing 1, it can't use pellets, it can use crags, but it can't use clusters. So a lot of the basic types, I mean 2 out of 3, you can't even use those types, and you can only use a few different types of bullets moving on. As you can see, you've got recover, again completely useless, can't even use this shot. Poison, however, very useful, as these light bow guns, when I use them a lot later. Poison is one of the things I'm going to really want when using a light bow gun later on, because that is pretty much the only way to achieve certain things in the quest I'm going to be using for. A lot of foreshadowing, but be prepared, you're not going to see that until 4 stars. Unfortunate, but true. Moving on to the other bullets. Something else you might notice is that light bowguns can use a lot of the status-inducing effects, or the sort of terrain abilities, I'm going to call them, like tranking, paintballs, and dung shots, those sort of things. They're all sort of things you use on a quest just to make the quest either easier for yourself or easier for your team. They can use a lot of the antidote ones and the sort of healing ones, which can be very useful online, but again, not useful offline. So you can ignore those pretty much. So that pretty much wraps up light bowguns and the crossbow gun, which, to be honest, I'll get more in detail when I actually use these weapons later in the game. But for now, we're going to switch over to talk about the armor we can now buy now that we use the kut-ku scale tactic. Okay, and the first set of armor we're going over today is chain armor. Chain armor is a good alternative to leather armor, which is pretty much the bog standard armor. Chain armor I've already gone over in the actual episode where I bought it, and I'm actually using it right now, so you can see how good it is as it is. Something I forgot to go over is status effects. Since leather armor doesn't have a status effect on its own, it has to be used in combination with other things, it doesn't have one as a full set of armor. Chain armor, exactly the same, doesn't have a status effect. Status effects, early on, they're not as useful as later on, because the later on armors can have very, very good ones. Early on, they don't exactly have that great of abilities. They can be very, very helpful in some situations, but not others. So just look out for them. You may have to do a bit of research on your own, because there are a lot of abilities that you can have. I'll go over all of the different ones where you combine armors later on at the end of the LP, but I won't do that for right now, because I'm only going to be going over the ones that appear as full set of armors, or the ones I'm actually using. So for now, that's all I have to say on chain armor. Okay, next up we have Hunter's Armour. Hunter's Armour is the first type of armour where you can have both Blademaster type of armour and Gunner's type of armour. It's a custom armour for Hunters, one of the most common types of armour. So yeah, as you can see, it's got a lot higher defense. A lot of the other armours we've looked at so far have got 20. It's got fire resistance of -5, so it's one of the first type of armours to actually have negative resistance. And as you can see, most of it doesn't have very good resistance. That's because this is Blademaster armour. Blademaster armour typically has higher defense but lower elemental resistance, because elemental damage is only done at range, whereas, you know, just regular sort of crashing into you, stepping on you sort of damage is done obviously right up close. It's only got a rarity of 1, so it's nothing amazing. You can't make it yet, you can only buy it using the kut-ku scale tactic or just grinding money some other way. So yeah, it's not exactly the most amazing type of armor, but it's still pretty good for this point in the game. I would suggest going with chainmail, because grinding up 3,750 zenny will take you a hell of a long time. I mean, it'll take you about 3 hours to do it. So yeah, that's not exactly the most helpful thing in the world. So to be honest, maybe chain armor would be better, and just getting through some of the earlier quests and then getting some better armor later on. Because sometimes I don't even get armor for the whole of 1 star. I sometimes just go right through, go right to the 2 star and just start there getting armor. And to be honest, this armor compared to the stuff you can get at 2 star is not worth it. So to be honest, unless you have a lot of money to burn somehow, this armor may not be worth it. However, on another note, looking at the gunner armor, it may be useful, since this is one of the few types of gunner armor you can actually get that's designed specifically for gunners. As you can see, the resistances are a lot higher. You've got 10 resistance to fire, which could be very fantastic at this point in the game if there was fire damage just kicking about, which there isn't. Thunder resistance, again, has gone up. Again, not very useful. Dragon resistance, never going to see that. It's not exactly useful. Water damage, won't see that either. So these resistance, even though they're a nice thing to have, you won't see them. As the description says, although it's weaker than Hunter's armor, it's more resilient to elemental damage. So that's pretty nice. It's a nice thing to have, but it's not something you're going to be using this early on unless you don't change out until about 3 star, which most people will do. Okay, and the final piece of armor we've got today is Dark Metal Boots. Dark Metal Boots are kind of unique in the fact that you can only buy them, and there's only one piece to them. Obviously they're boots, so there's only the leg piece. Dark Metal Boots, made by fusing iron with black ore, these boots shine with dark luster. You can buy them for 6,400 zenny, which is quite a bit for a single piece of armor. They provide 5 defense, they have no fire resistance, they have a little bit of thunder resistance, which again is not really worth it. They have negative water resistance, which again, it's not really important at this point. They've got a rarity of 2, so that's probably the rarest piece of armor you can actually buy at this point in the game. Another thing to note about the dark metal boots is that, as you can see, they make you look like Batman from the legs down, which is pretty cool. And to be honest, if these work with other pieces of armor, I would certainly wear these. I think that's all of the armors we have to cover for now, so it's back to the episode.